First and foremost, I would like to thank my illustrious compatriots who are hoping to become our next president, and who, despite all the difficulties with the travel arrangements due to the pilot strike, have accepted our invitation and made it all the way to Cartagena. Before you is a group of eminent citizens with very broad professional and political experiences, very honorable ones. Colombia is very proud to have such a diverse group of presidential pre-candidates. On behalf of this community, it is my desire that during this campaign that is beginning, there be maintained democratic principles, respect in controversy. Democracy is built in debate and discussion, but in the respectful discussion of the ideas, which I believe has happened thus far. The speakers know, they're familiar with the speech I gave the day before yesterday, and they have received a short portfolio of figures that back some of the topics that's the supporting evidence of some of the issues I talked about, the issues with very important social importance, not only for the insurance sector. But I want to reassert that what Fasecolda wants to open the country today is a space for you to propose to the country the vision of what you hope for Colombia. So the information I gave you collects the concerns of the insurance sector for you to study and consider. The moderator of both panels will be Daniel Pacheco, one of the most eminent young journalists in Colombia, to whom I would like to give the floor now. Thank you very much, Jorge Humberto, for your introduction. Good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our candidates. And very quickly, so as not to rob you of time, I'm going to establish the rules of this format. You each have 7 minutes for initial comments. I am going to be very strict with time management. This is a sector that specializes in the future, and time is the future. You will have an open space for your presentations, and then we will return in the order for Marta Lucia to be the last one after having started with a specific question that will be of interest to this sector. And to sort of establish a setting for your presentations, let me tell you, I am 35 years old. I will live, if I live like an average Colombian, 40 years more, which means I would have 13 as a retiree receiving a pension. So this is the business of the people who sit in your audience, those you are addressing. Work with the future, and I hope your presentations revolve around this. I'm not going to make introductions. I'm sure every one of you is well known, so I believe we could just start with Marta Lucia Ramírez's remarks. Good morning. I want to thank Jorge Botero and Fasecolda for allowing us this opportunity to share with you at a time that's going to be very important, a turning point for Colombia. You know about risk more than anyone, and this is a moment where Colombia and its future are at risk. And they are at risk for many reasons. I don't have time to point fingers at anyone or causes. First of all, because that's not my style, because it doesn't matter, because we cannot change the past, because we are responsible for the future, because we are here. And because when I run Colombia, I will only look to the future, not being hooked on the problems and the hates and the hates and the fights of the past. I will govern looking to the future, looking for a different country and governing over a society that understands that the future belongs to all of us, and it is our responsibility together to care for it. But why are are we going to be responsible for this? We are going to have to go over many highways. We have new highways that have been built very modern, but we also have unpaved roads and very difficult routes. And we have two directions that we can choose. If we go on the one hand, we will find the risk of the three I's. And what's the risk of the three I's? Whereby ideology, everybody tells us everything is bad, this country is a mess, it's a disaster, the ruling class has been terrible, everything has to be changed, we have to erase and start all over again. The second I is that of ingenuity. Ingenuity says everything is bad, everybody's guilty, the system doesn't work, the economic model doesn't work, the political class has been corrupt, there's corruption everywhere. And we, the good ones, are going to change everything. Also because the country is not working right. And on the other hand, we have the three I, the I of the indolentes, or those who believe that running power is a matter of personal gain. Those who have always been in power, resorting to favoring those who use the government for their friends, for their relatives, those who have had very close connections with those that surround them and have been corrupt, and who today are so much hated by Colombian citizens, or the I for indolente in Spanish. Those who believe that nothing is happening and the country is going to fall in the same hands again. And Colombia cannot do good with any of these three I's. If we do, we will fall. We will fall and not be able to get up again. But there's another way out. I find that there can be a sea of confianza or trust. This trust that we need to be able to restore in Colombia, and that I propose to do. And how? First, by strengthening Colombia's economy. I know about that. I was Minister of Foreign Trade for 4 years with Andrés Pastrana. I know about competitiveness. We designed many public policies that disappeared in this country, where unfortunately the lack of continuity explains many of the mistakes made by our state. A new administration, a new president, a new minister. Let's erase, delete everything and start from scratch. No, we need to have long-term policies, state policies. And it is on this purpose that we need to recover our economy, strengthen the industry, to have a modern industrial policy that's competitive, with innovation, with added value, with value chains that allow us to be part of those global value chains. Second, agro-industry, to pass from the 5 million hectares to 10, 12 million hectares planted with food, but to process and to have agro-industry and to provide income to the peasants. It cannot be that today Colombia has 88% of its rural population living in informal conditions. Third, recovering the economy via services, financial services, technological services, education, health, and of course, everything implied by that new economy, that of the fourth industrial revolution. Knowledge, environmental industries, all the industries that we know today are developing the entire world. And Colombia continues talking about the issues of the century before the last. And we are also going to strengthen this state and institutionality, and to have a justice that operates, that is expedite, that is effective and efficient, because Colombia did not make the judicial reform that we so much insisted on before the conversations with FARC. Why talk about a referendum that can no longer be implemented? I'm going to do that when I'm president, to ensure that there's no criminal today that continues being without punishment or paying for his crimes, or continuing his criminal activities from jail, because we're going to have a true jail or penitentiary reform to process but also to punish. We are not going to accept criminals with the technology, the devices, with internet, that continue their criminal activities from jail. And of course, many of you will ask yourselves, what's going to happen with FARC, which is what concerns us so much. I've said it all the time. Every time I've made proposals for this agreement to be good, to be improved, I always said it's convenient for the country to put an end to this conflict. That is mandatory from an ethical standpoint. And we're going to finish it. But unfortunately, our recommendations were not taken into account. Today we have that these men that have demobilized need to stay outside of the conflict. But this agreement can not either be destroyed or maintained exactly the way it is, because it generates huge risks to our democracy, risks to us and to our children and those that will come in the future. So it needs some adjustments, especially on justice, when we see police and soldiers without effective justice, whereas those in FARC are traveling around the country telling us how they're going to govern us and giving us lessons on ethics. But it is also true that this reform will be submitted to Colombians' opinions. This referendum that is still owed to us, we will undertake for the Colombian citizens to determine whether we want to see the leaders of the guerrilla groups in politics or not. Never in Colombia can there be a division where it is said it's that those who want peace are those of the buenismo or the good ones, and the others are the ones who want war. We always said yes to peace, and there will never be such a deficient agreement. Yes to peace, but it needs to have, necessarily needs to have adjustments, because you cannot understand that the friend of the war is whoever who defends the Constitution and democracy, which is what I have always done myself. Thank you very much. El bra. Creo que no se ha dado cuenta. Senator Duque. Good morning. A warm greeting to the organizers, Jorge Humberto, and the rest of panelists and other candidates. What are the three main challenges our country has today? What are those 3 pages that we have to turn over in our history, and in what direction do we need to build our future? I think that the first challenge that we have in Colombia is that there is a culture of impunity that is linked to many phenomena. It is linked to the money laundering phenomenon, to corruption. It is linked to drug trafficking and also kidnapping and abduction. It is also linked to non-compliance of the laws permanently, as you also experience, where, for instance, in the insurance sector, like SOAT, there's 39% evasion. And this tax is many times used to handle, because what it's looked at is some look at it to use it and deviate it, a culture of impunity. This challenge implies that we also need to review what's happening with our economic model, which is still a truly fiscal economic model, where the private sector is seen like a milk cow that the state always milks to fulfill its desire for expenses. So we spend and spend and spend poorly, and then this is collected from the private sector. Today, we also see a private sector that is saturated with proceedings, with regulations, 68,000 resolutions in the last 14 years, 17,000 decrees, more than 2,000 and some official newsletters. And we also see a private sector that needs to resort to multiple windows to operate, increasing the cost to the country. And this leads us to the third big challenge, which is one of equality, because it is a country that has a very high informality rate, where more than 60% of the people in the labor system today are experiencing great insatisfaction. They cannot have a pension. They cannot have expectation for the future after 65 years.
We have a system in which the statistical agency asks citizens, have you worked 1 hour with or without payment? And if you answer yes, it means that you are like the part of the working population. But actually only 7 contribute to health and pension, and only to our retired. If we take into account that economic model that is there just for the private sector to be a source of income, and we have an inequality that leads to that informality, it means that we have to pass that page, and it is there where we have our proposal. Our first homework. I mean, we need to put in place the concept of legality, and we should not affect justice in that sense, as we always do it. If we have a culture of compliance with the law where we have excess regulations, it will end up being simplified by complying with the law, and this means that the private sector will no longer be just a source of income, but to become a real model of entrepreneurship in Colombia. To start with a state that reduces unnecessary expenses, that eliminates it, that can do a great reform to public administration to have permanent savings, and to tell the private sector that we want to reduce taxes, to have a regulation in terms of procedures, and this will result in equity and the creation of formal employment, that it's going to allow to make more contributions to pensions, that it's going to allow to have a higher level of insurance, that it's going to allow for the country to have more population having access to higher education, and it's going to allow for us to have a real model by means of which equity and productivity will go hand in hand under the base of having an adequate coverage in education and in terms of health. That's the country of these three concepts: legality, entrepreneurship, and equality. And in that model, the insurance sector plays a very important role, and that's why I do not want to leave it aside, because this sector needs to have certainty and incentives to improve the role of society. I want to see a Colombia where the life premiums improve, because it's a way of protecting the family from uncertainties in the future. I was the author of a bill to increase educational coverage, and I think that mechanism is very important for the middle class, because it allows for families to use part of the severance pay resources in those moments in which they need the money to pay for their education. And I think that if we're going to speak about legality, we have to tell the insurance sector that all those things that are happening with SOAT should have an oversight, that insurance cannot be used as a mechanism to have a sector that is self-financing to protect the risk, and it is becoming just a petty cash. That insured sector needs to participate in our Colombian reality with pension funds, insurance to protect those who have uncertainties in the labor market. Legality, entrepreneurship, and equity are the basis of Colombia's transformation. I think that the insurance sector should play an important role there. Senator Claudia López. Thank you, Daniel. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I apologize because I have a cold, and thank you. I have to go to, so I should leave the audience in half an hour. I would like to thank, and I would like to in the country that we have today, in the real country, not in the PowerPoint of the Minister of Finance. This is a country that has the following social and state contract in which many of its activities are not viable. This is a country that doesn't control half of its territory, and where 1/3 of its population, around 15 million Colombians, do not have a state and do not have a market. They do not have justice. They do not have public education. They do not have public employment. They do not even have a legal employment. They are not only in informal economies, but in illegal activities, and where they are never going to buy an insurance, and they are never going to contribute to pensions. And but the Minister of Finance didn't tell us in one of his slides that this is a country that for 16 years have had an economic policy where you cross the fingers and you expect for the oil price to happen. But we have to thank them because we were saved. What we need is a government with an economic model that is capable of building citizenship state without choking those that have a state and a market with excessive taxes and regulatory payments, and stop having two Colombians that do not know each other. The second reason why their businesses are not viable is Colombia's social contract. The Colombia that we have today, 50 years of war, where Colombia has no state, where corruption is very high, where those that take office, what they do is that they govern with delinquents, and they have a general attorney that declares impunity. That Colombia has a social contract where 20% of the children do not know their parents or their father. It has early pregnancy of 24% in rural areas and 80% in urban areas. If we are going to have an agreement in the post-conflict, let's commit ourselves with something minimum to have loved and desired babies. I mean, let's start with something important before talking about pensions. Then we have 2.5 million outside early childhood care, children that started with half of the potential of their lives, because the potential of our cognitive life takes place during the first year. We have we have a large number of youngsters that have dropped out of school. They do not study, they do not work, and if they do not do that, they are not going to save hands. They are never going to retire, which means that we have a generation growing to have a miserable elderly years. And we have irresponsible parents, young girls pregnant, people that boys that drop out from school, and those that can get to 11th grade, which is half of it started. And you said that only X number are smart, so they're going to have free college education. And women that stayed, 2,300,000 women without education with children. Okay, we'll send them a check that is of Familias en Acción, because you women are a lost case. That's the social contract of today's Colombia. And the result is having half of the economy under informality without the possibility of buying an insurance or saving for future years. If you want for your sector to improve, it's to start building the country we need in order not to have that picture, a country that can show justice, public justice in all the territory. Here we cannot say that the FARC was capable of mobilizing. It's not what the agreements say. It's the ability of the Colombian state to comply with the Constitution, not with the agreements. A Colombia in which we would reduce to zero undesirable pregnancies, that we will include 2.5 million in early childhood services, so they will not lose half of their potential. We can tell the youth of Colombia that they are all smart. It's just that they all have different opportunity. If I were the same Claudia López, but I would have not born in Bogota, my mother would not have been the first lady in my family. to have had access to education. But if I were Claudia López, that was born in Valpes, without no education, I would not be standing here. So we should take them when they are 10 years old, not when they are 16 and are pregnant, but when they are 10, and to renew like a social agreement with them. And to offer, X number of years of school. We're just asking for certain things, not to drop out from school and from life, to have a curricular and extracurricular activity, and to take care of their bodies and avoid undesirable pregnancy. And we're going to tell the mothers of Subsidios and Acción, we're giving them a subsidy not to educate themselves, not to work, and to maintain the same subsidy and to contribute to health, but the objective of that subsidy is to educate themselves and to be part of the labor market. Like this, we'll have 2,300,000 women that with the same money or a bit more can complete their educational cycle, can participate in the labor market, and you can tell entrepreneurs pay the rest of their salary, pensions and severance pay in order not to have a generation of poor old people. Thank you, Daniel. Good morning. Special greetings to Jorge Humberto Botero. Thank you for the invitation. Dear friends, Colombia is going through very difficult moments in its institutional, political, economic, and social lives. Hence, we need to take again the path with leadership, with authority. I want to share with you which are these proposals with which I think we can recover the path of Colombia. These are 5. I'm not going to cover 5, just the first 2. The first proposal is to recover credibility and trust in institutions. The second one is more employment, dignifying a better paid employment. The third one is security for everyone, mainly urban security. The fourth one is to recover the social fabric and family protection. And the fifth one is modern, competitive agriculture. But I want to share with you the first 2 proposals. The first one is to recover credibility and trust in our institutions. Today, more than ever, 80% of Colombians have a negative image of justice, 79% of the Congress, 76% of the presidency of the Republic. Today, the 3 pillars of rule of law has lost credibility and trust. And that's a disaster if we want to maintain democracy and if we want to strengthen institutions. What am I proposing to recover credibility and trust? The first thing, to fight corruption. If there is something that has affected that trust, it is corruption at every level of the 3 public powers and at the national, regional, local level. So for that, I'm proposing jail for corrupt and 0 sentence reduction. And thirdly, to take the money, the ill-gotten money they have from education, housing, health, and all those sources from where they have obtained them. Social sanction through the establishment of the shame wall for corrupts, where their picture should be in all the public spaces, so people will not forget who stole the different resources from the state. And 5, more oversight with the participation of professors, students, and citizens to reinforce the oversight and to have a better accountability. And corruption, no matter from where it comes, needs to be faced. It doesn't matter if it's a relative, it doesn't matter if it's a political friend. We have to fight corruption because it not only drains states' resources, but it drains credibility and trust. trust. The second proposal to recover credibility and trust is the amendment of the agreements par exantes, to have ignored the plebiscite and to have put in place that message that to be a bad guy in Colombia has its benefits, as it is reflected in the agreements, has affected the credibility and trust in institutions. That's why I'm proposing to take out from the Colombian Constitution the par exantes agreement. And secondly, to put aside the verification committee. What it does is that it allows FARC to govern the legislative and executive power, and also to resume extradition for FARC drug traffickers that it's banned today. Fourth, not to give 20 radio stations, because no political power in Colombia can have radio stations. So 20 radio stations are given to FARC through RCTV, and they have a coverage of 80,000 inhabitants, and that's to impose their doctrine among Colombians. And fifth, to recover to recover justice and institutions under the responsibility of the state, to amend this justice for peace. The fifth proposal is a dignifying job. I think that this country has to move as the only source to produce well-being and wealth with the effort of every single Colombia. That's why my commitment is with free enterprise and with free private initiative. Secondly, in order to have a support through the reduction of the tax burden that today has Colombia paying 65 to 75%, 9 points above Latin America and above the average of the European countries, as to dignifying job, an important productive entrepreneurship program today, when we see an unemployment of around 17% among youth. Entrepreneurship with a program sponsored by entrepreneurs. This could guarantee that these youngsters could develop their productive capability. The third topic, a significant reduction in the different proceedings. For each new proceeding, we have to delete 394,000 between resolutions and decrees have been issued in the country between the year 2000 and 2016. We really have to facilitate the life of citizens so they will develop their productive activity. Moreover, we have to be concerned about workers, and hence the proposal to increase the workers' salary, not only to have a higher available income, but that we can make consumption more dynamic. My dear friends, our economic model has to take us to be concerned, so that SMEs will find the possibility of entering into alliances and to progress in sustainability. 6 out of every 10 companies close their doors before the first 4 years. We have to guarantee that that doesn't happen. To the contrary, entrepreneurship should be consolidated, and also the effort to create companies that could be created with leadership and authority. Thank you. Juan Fernando Cristo of the Liberal Party. Good morning to each and every one of you. Or Humberto, thank you very much for this invitation. Thanks for inviting us to design this country vision shared by all of us. I will summarize my proposal in that all Colombians, we should be capable of allowing or promoting the country's growth We cannot accept Colombia's growth just as an economic growth. We want to speak about a growth in Colombia from the values, from the institutional area, a growth in Colombia where we will be able to improve our institutions, a growth in Colombia where we will revisit concepts such as that of justice, democracy, equality, equity for all Colombians. When we say that Colombia should grow, we must guarantee that this growth is for everyone and not just for a few. And that growth of Colombia has had many constraints lately. That was also mentioned here. Obviously, the drop in oil prices, the lack of productivity in our economy for many years. But in my opinion, the main constraint of this growth is the polarization and the pessimism that has invaded Colombians. Our campaign in months to come is going to be against polarization and pessimism that is now part of the lives of Colombians. As Colombians, we cannot just stay stagnant in the past, in a past of revenge, hate, polarization, and violence. I've asked myself, are we going to continue talking about the content of peace agreements with FARC? This country, when FARC left down their weapons, they have stopped kidnapping. When they are becoming a political party in 10 years, are they going to be analyzing each section of the peace agreement? Or do you think that it's much better to look at the future? Here, everybody has talked about the future, and to start seeing how a country without FARC can lead us to having a more inclusive, a more solidary society in which there is room for every single Colombian. That's the main challenge that we have as a society. The peace agreement with FARC was signed, was approved by the Congress, was approved by the Constitutional Court. So now let's ask FARC to meet the peace agreement and for the state to be capable of complying with the peace agreement, and let us talking about topics related to the future of our nation. We have 10 commandments according to Christ, which I'm not going to share with you. I'm just going to share one with you. One in which we want to summarize what has been said here in the economic arena. One of the commandments is to guarantee the security of every single Colombian. But when we speak about security, we do not speak about physical security threatened by the armed conflict, by citizens' delinquency, mainly in the important urban centers of the country. We are speaking of security from the economic and social standpoints for all of our citizens. That security that is guaranteed with rights for every single Colombian, the right to education, the right to health, the right to live with peace of mind in our elderly years, the fear of every citizen that he's not going to be able to feed his children, and that we're not going to continue living with this fear that has been imposed to us. I just want to mention two proposals. The first one, it was mentioned by Claudia López. This program, Ser Pilo Paga, has been a positive program, but in the next 4 years, we're going to have 3 million high school students graduating. If we continue at this pace, 1.5 of them it's not going to have where to study, so we have to strengthen this plan, and strengthening public universities. We can open vacancies for our youth in Colombia. As to the unemployment insurance, I read carefully the proposal presented by Fasecolda. We should go beyond that and guarantee a base salary for every single Colombian. that is in working age and has a right to pension. How are we going to guarantee this? Today, the Colombian state spends or invests, whatever you want to call it, 75 billion Colombian pesos in subsidies by way of pension, public utilities, subsidies, in assistance program, in conflict victims repair. Let's concentrate the state social spending in a few things. Let's have a social spending that is more coherent, more effective, with more justice for every single Colombian. Let's guarantee that income, and in this way we do not have to give out checks and subsidies like Familias en Acción all around the country, just a universal base salary for every single Colombian. And at last, an invitation to each and every one of you this morning and our friends from the panel. Let's commit ourselves to stop the left and the right populism. They are all harmful to our society. Those that advocate the left or advocate the right have really caused a lot of harm in Latin America. Let's stop populism, guaranteeing a private sector that generates wealth, a strong private sector that will not be victim of corruption in this country, and a state that spends well in its citizens, guaranteeing social services for each and every one of them. Thank you, former minister. Okay, now I want to start with Claudia López, who needs to go. So, Claudia, I'm going to ask a question. You're saying that justice and security should be a public good. Can you tell me about the private role? And I want to talk about your political alliance with Jorge Robledo, who has a limited vision of the private sector. So we want to know which is your vision of the private sector. Yeah, do not judge, Jorge Enrique, just invite him to come. Okay, in these 5 minutes, I want to say, how do we think we should build the country I previously mentioned? These are the key to have a society that produces education, job opportunities, savings, and pension opportunities. 2 basic things. That is a market economy, a powerful market economy with entrepreneurs that we do not, quote unquote, choke. What I liked, or the only thing I liked from the presentation of the Minister of Finance, that we're going in the right path and we are lowering the corporations' taxes and also guaranteeing what they have to pay and what they don't have to pay. We have to continue that path so that Colombia can make sure that they will pay 3 points less of what's forecasted, but with a condition for everyone to pay the same if entrepreneurs want legal security. Here we have 50, we have a lot of people that have many exemptions by way of a disguised corruption. I'm speaking of 72 million. If we want legal security for the entrepreneurs, they should all pay 30%, and we should have a differential rate just for SMEs. Of perhaps 20-25%, but all of them on the same page. That's the first thing. The second thing we should have is an investment in science, technology, and innovation that will increase the productivity of the Colombian economy. The Colombian economy sometimes grows more, sometimes it grows less, but during the past 20 years, it has had the same productivity level. That's our main bottleneck. We need investment in science, technology, and innovation for the business sector so that it will really improve its productivity and competitiveness levels. Colombia has 13 free trade agreements. That's perfect, but we're not taking advantage of them with 13 free trade agreements and the best exchange rate in recent years, and exports dropped instead of increasing. And I'm not talking about only commodities. I'm talking about other sectors that are only recovering now. The third bottleneck, in order not to have the country we would like to have, because I'm sure that the social contract that I propose should not have that many objections. We need a state that will do two things that the Colombian state is not doing today. And my apologies with my predecessors. They've been governing for 16 years, and they have not been able to have a state that will grow without commodity exports in more than 5%, and a state that can double tax collection, not to steal it, and to provide security, justice, education, health, science, technology of good quality. This state collects 14% of GDP in taxes, and most of the entrepreneurs in Colombia want to be like in Chile. Chile has 1/10 of the corruption we have here, and they collect 28% of GDP by way of taxes and to provide quality public goods. It's not to reinvent the wheel. That's the recipe. We have a state with a political class that steals 50 billion Colombian pesos per year. I mean, they extort you with high taxes, and they do not provide public goods to 1/3 of its population and half of its territory, starting with justice. So the recipe is clear. We need to have a state that in the next 15 years, they will duplicate income earnings, will go from 14 to 28, but with the tax structure that I mentioned. Less taxes to companies, more incentives to productivity and competitiveness, a broader base of employees, a more progressive, and I would think that at the end of my government, we can start returning 1 point of the value-added tax every 2 years. The value-added tax was something stupid. It depressed household consumption and companies' investment. That's why we have a growth of less than 2%, and it has many regressive effects, with which we should go to the last element so we can build the economy. And today we just don't have it. And now I want to talk about two specific things about this sector. The pension reform is a mandate for the coming administration. It cannot be avoided, and it's not really popular, but it needs to be done. We need to have a system of pillars with a universal insurance for the senior citizens and a more competitive saving system. We have to divide pensions of higher income, because that's the only way in which we can correct the high level of regressiveness that pensions have today.
And we need to continue building the system of pillars to compensate pensions and the severance base, like I mentioned, for the Familias en Acción and others that I mentioned. Lastly, the SOAT, in 30 seconds, I'll finish. For SOAT, I agree that we'll not only base the rate on the type of vehicle, but we need to make an intelligent combination, the type of vehicle and the user, and link this to the purchase of that vehicle and the use of that type of vehicle so that we can reduce, for instance, the costs that are not covered today. Thank you very much. And I agree with your employment insurance, and we will sure implement this in my administration. Senator Claudia López from the Green Party, Partido Verde. Let's now then continue with the order. Mr. Cristo, then, you are the only representative or pre-candidate of the Liberal Party that I think we have. Oh, Galán? No, Galán left. A vision. I wanted to ask you about your vision of the state in public security, and thinking more of that vision of the Liberal Party. What do you believe should be the role of the state? And let me give you some suggestions. What should be the role of Colpensiones and its competition with the private pension funds? Should it be a permanent role? What ideas do you have there from the liberalism? Well, several ideas that deal with this sector. I believe that one of the mistakes of these years of administration have been not to advance in the pension reform. It is indispensable, necessary. There was a small pension reform without that ambition that had a positive effect, but very limited during the administration of President Uribe in 2007, 2008. One needs to go beyond that. One needs to build a pillars system with one public pillar that guarantees universal modest insurance for all retirees with pension, and one private pillar that guarantees voluntary contribution, eliminating the existing difference between the private system, the prima media system, and the other systems. I also believe high taxes should be imposed on the high pension. In Colombia, taxes were increased, but that was insufficient. Also, at the Liberal Party, I believe that we need to advance on SOAT, talking about the sector's proposal. Here, we're talking about fake driving schools. There's no control on this. Also, the informality, the 39% evasion on SOAT, the issue of the motorcycles that's overflowed in Colombia. We need to impose controls to make this insurance regime one that's feasible and obviously one that's required in Colombia, but that needs to be reformed. About this, also about the tax reform and the private sector that I did not mention during my earlier comments. Talking about economic policy, we are going to be unable to consolidate peace in our territories. We will be unable to fill many of the voids mentioned by Claudia López if we continue with this centralized regime in our country. The peace process allowed us to put an end to FARC. If FARC have ended as an armed group, we need to end with centralism in Colombia because FARC somewhat justified this territorial regime. We need a regime with greater territorial autonomy. We need to advance in a regime that allows municipalities and departments of Colombia to have their own resources. We cannot talk about decentralization and autonomy, Mr. Duque, if we don't make a territorial fiscal reform that perhaps 25 or 30 years ago has been being postponed in Colombia. When we talk about tax reforms, we cannot continue speaking about simply reducing the tax rate on companies. Today, income in Colombia, 75% of taxes come from companies and 25% from individuals. Worldwide, the ratio is equally opposite. The increase of VAT was without proportions and affected indirect taxes cannot continue to be the main source. We need to combat corruption at DIAN. Listen, with this episode of the Panama Papers, Colombia collected 3 billion pesos out of 29 that were involved in this issue. 3 billion pesos is half of the tax reform that was done this year. If we combat evasion and we advance in a territorial tax reform, we will have a private sector that is more vigorous, that guarantees the greater generation of wealth in Colombia, that guarantees, I insist, that in Colombia we won't receive the winds of populism of the extreme left and right, which so much hurt democracies in our continent, and that guarantees a state that spends its resources better. Thank you very much, former Minister Juan Fernando Cristo. Senator María del Rosario, I understand that you have a concrete proposal regarding employment insurance. it would be interesting to talk about that as to how it could be structured and what would be the role of the private sector and public sector, and how your colleagues at the Centro Democrático, or I would encourage you to explain why you are the best option out of the five. Thank you, Daniel. First, let me start by saying that the future of Colombia is hanging on economic security, juridical security, and physical security. The first, economic security, is stability in the rules of the game. And here we have experienced in recent years a change in the stability of the rules of the game, and that's why I'm talking about the recent study by FENALCO, which showed how in 66% of businessmen are disencouraged to invest simply because between decrees, resolutions, laws, bills, etc., the rules of the game have changed. So the future depends for there to be stability in the rules of the game, but also juridical stability. Yesterday we were at Vichada, where we saw that the greatest concern of many people in agriculture, small, mid, and large size, is what's going to happen with their lands. What is going to happen with their lands when today they are being told that essentially if they're landhold owners, they don't have security. Even if it's in good faith, they don't have secured a title, an ownership title. And also there's been a conflict that's been unleashed between peasants for conflicts over the land. So there's something basic here that by itself means nothing, but if we put it to produce, this is the source of wealth for many inhabitants of the Colombian rural sector, close to 11 million people. And physical security that I had already mentioned. The fundamental thing is to recover security and safety in the cities, which are threatened today by thefts, by extortion, and in rural areas by cattle, the stealing of cattle. Jorge Humberto has made very interesting comments regarding three types of insurance. The first one of my greatest interest is to massify agricultural insurance. Just 2.8% of loans allocated in the country go to agricultural insurance, and that only covers 8% of production. So we need to concern ourselves for massifying agricultural insurance, because that's another way of helping to see if we can reach at least 20% of the agricultural production covered in loans. And this is due to the fact that given the risk, climate risks, and also the changes in the rules in the agricultural sector, then insurance is simply insufficient. We had seen how we require to have special institutionality to handle insurance in the case of the agricultural sector. A second point is unemployment insurance. I share Jorge Humberto's proposal some months ago for us to start reflecting upon it, which is that those who have been fired unjustly and for up to 6 months, and as a result of the interest over their severance pay, can have some sort of insurance. I agree. In fact, I'm proposing it in a draft bill. But for artisanal fishermen, we're proposing an insurance that protects this population, which is a poor population, the poorest in the country, which today doesn't know what to do and how to do during blackout periods. So what you're proposing is entirely feasible. We would need to make sure that they don't have public resources. And regarding SOAT, we need to review the profiles, both of the vehicle as of the driver. I think that's the reaction we need to take. And there's the moral risk, to reduce the moral risk. And also that we do not allow SOAT to be used to bleed out the health sector and facilitate some people's lives that instead of going via the regular policies, follow this one. But in terms of SOAT, this has to go complemented with a highway security policy and motorcycle policies, because of 5 departments, 4 are on the Caribbean coast with the highest accident rate, and it's the department where motorcycles are the ones causing the highest accident rate. So it has has to follow a strategy. Cesar, Sucre, Magdalena, and Córdoba. These 4 departments is where motorcycles are causing all these accidents, highest accident rates. And regarding pensions, I fully agree. I'm proposing a universal minimum pension. From there on, whoever wants to have more contributes. But we need to ensure 2,000. There's so many people in Colombia today worthy of a pension with BEPS, a few, and other programs, very little. But we're talking about 2 million Colombian citizens that are not receiving a single peso, and they're poor Colombians. For this reason, we need to secure these resources. And for the next, I'll answer to you why they should vote for me. Thank you very much. Senator Duque, in your agenda, equity, security, and innovation, I am sure there'll be some reforms that cannot be postponed. What or which of these reforms that are not popular could you carry out, bring to fruit? And let me repeat to you, just as María del Rosario, why you from the 5 pre-candidates from Uribe's group? Well, the problem with the problem is that populists like to drink milk and eat the meat from the same cow. So on the one hand, they talk about economic liberalism, market openness, but on the other hand, they go out and promote judicial uncertainty, exacerbating popular consultations for political purposes. Or they have sectorial policies to destroy sectors that are necessary in Colombia's economy. If you ask me, I wouldn't label them unpopular. I would label them necessary reforms that Colombia needs vertically with commitment. First, this is a country where we have too many taxes. Colombia has a sound fiscal reforms. There's 22 national taxes and only 4 account for more than 90% of the collection. There's 15 departmental taxes and only 3 of them represent more than 50% of the collection. More than 40 local taxes and only 6 account for 90% of the collection. What does this mean? That we need a simpler tax system, more effective, more transparent. On the other hand, you cannot continue telling companies that other companies are going to pay 34% tax rate, which is above the OECD, and it have incomes for more than 800 million pesos. Impose another 40% where they additionally have logistics costs, energy, proceedings, which are excess. The reform needs to imply, yes, a revision of the exemption system, leave the exemptions the country needs, but adapt them to the to make it a serious tax reform. But this country needs for the private sector to stop being seen as a source of fiscal income and seen as a partner to dynamize investments and generate more formal jobs. That's a reform. Now, the pensional reform, yes, important and very necessary. But a lot of, we talk a lot too much here, too many words. It's not the system of pillars. The problem with Colombia is that 38 billion pesos of the budget are being spent to ensure only 1 out of every 4 over 65. What does the reform need to do to end with that competition of regimes, that they all have the same way of calculating their liquidation, that there's no discrepancies when making balanced returns, and something that is fundamental, the concentration of subsidies. Mr. Juan Fernando, the majority of resources that go to subsidies go to the highest quintile of the population, which are the only ones that can improve their income in the final 10 years in which they contribute to pension. So this is a way to get these resources to those the most needy. I believe it's important to have solidarity pillars, but let's finance them and pre-finance them. Elderly Colombia. we will not have 5 million Colombians over 65, but 15 in some years. If we don't have a special savings for that, this will also become an unmanageable fiscal bomb, because these people will vote in 20 years, 30 years. So ending with the competition of giving financial soundness to this is necessary to our country. And let me talk about two more. The health reform the country also needs. We need a very transparent system in health. First, we need to know who owes whom and how much, and how these debts are going to be balanced and paid out. Secondly, we need for the financial superintendency to oversee the insurance system, the ACPs, to fulfill the technical reserves requirements, and for these to not receive resources by the number of affiliates, but also for the quality accredited with a system of rewards and compensations, so that the bad ones disappear and only the good ones remain, that we have serious transplant policies, online medical records, greater underration of the out-of-pocket expenses. That is a true reform that the company needs. I have 30 seconds. Justice. We talk a lot about a justice reform, and I simply say this. This is a country that needs, first, to have a talent policy to recruit judges, to have better human capital, strengthen the first and second instances, to measure the jurisprudential presence, to also reward the quality of the rulings, and also make a smaller court. We have 88 high court judges. No, we need to shorten this. That's where is the true reform. And how will I differentiate myself? I respect all of them, but it should be you who decide that as Colombians. Marta Lucia, in your first remarks, you emphasized on what has to be corrected with the agreement signed by President Santos and FARC. Together with this reform, such ambitious reforms agenda, I would like for you to tell us how to reconcile an agenda of ambitious reforms towards tax reform and in health and insurance, while also connecting to or relating to the agreements. Well, first is that when we're here recognizing that there's an institutionality in Colombia and we are not going to refund, because some people believe we need to refund because we're all corrupt. What we need is to have experience and understand the operation of institutions from within. And I know Congress, and I know the political parties, and I know how serious a favoritism or favoring is that has affected politicians but have not strengthened political parties, because this country needs a change. We don't want to continue the way we've been. We cannot continue with us being told that we're going to advance, but let's stay in the same. The political class is part responsible, because unfortunately from the head of the state, many times, and not just now, many times, but this has now overflowed everything with this favoring and other things you want to call it. The majorities in the Congress have become stronger and the parties have become weaker. And this is the basis of populism. We can't talk about good or bad populism. It's all bad. But the problem here is the parties have been weakened. So the reform agenda, yes, I will do that. I want to strengthen the countries again for their ideologies, for the party to respond, to be accountable to the people that vote for them, so that the agreements between government and parties be done with the institutionality of the party. Not stealing the congressmen from the parties to end up like I'm doing today by collecting signatures, but I'm going to ask for your signatures because congressmen are embarking themselves or supporting whatever candidacy they're being told from the administration. So we need to have serious, sound parties and to be able to make a reality the reforms this country needs, which are urgent. This is a matter of responsibility. It's been entirely irresponsible to postpone the pension reform this country needs. entirely irresponsible to handle a tax reform in little pieces to then spend what's collected from that reform without having done what was necessary, which was a structural reform. This happens when there's people that say they're going to sign something on stone and later don't keep their word. And then with those strengthened parties with institutionality and looking straight to the countries, I will say, yes, we will move on. We will need to correct some things of the agreement, this special jurisdiction for peace, or JEP, HEP, that fortunately everybody's realizing now there's certain issues that are included in this agreement. And we criticized the agreement. Nobody realized or was aware of the money that came from drug trafficking by this group. We cannot allow for this crime to be not be punished, and that's going to help people from FARC do their campaigns for politics. So these adjustments need to make to the agreement, and they have to be very accurate on the part on this aspect of the justice and the jurisdiction in the ordinary jurisdiction, and also, as I mentioned, being very careful because the public forces are presently located in the worst position in terms of priority by the state and participation in politics of the leaders of FARC. I will maintain all the benefits the in general group were given, but of the heads, the leaders of the group, I cannot tolerate that without having paid for their crimes, they will run for office for Congress. And because I am Democratic, I believe it is the people who have to vote. Those who were owed a second referendum are the ones who are going to say if they want them or not in politics. But this has to be done with the parties. And also, when I talk about change, I'm talking about a strong Colombia, strong in its economy, with strong leadership that's believable because it has experience and because it has done throughout its life politics the way how we're saying now that it should be done. I've held 2 ministries, very transparent. Nobody could say that a peso was missing, that I appointed my family members, my cousins, or favored anybody. But also credible, because you have to arrive with character, with the long-term vision, with state policies, convinced that this society can be a strong society the day that institutions and civil society are strengthened in the commitment we all have to the future of Colombia, which is the reason why I am here doing politics. Not because I succeeded in life because I come from a political family, but because I decided to do politics after being Minister of Defense and having seen so many horrors that Colombia has. Thank you very much. An applause for this first round of pre-candidates. They say this country is ungovernable, but with so many candidates expecting to govern it, I think they're exaggerating. We now have another round. Thank you very much to you all. Let's continue then with this presidential forum at Fasecolda. Very strict, yes. We're a bit strict with our time. We have the next set of candidates. The rules of this forum are some remarks for 7 minutes where you can refer to your government program. It's open. And after that, a question based on what you have said and the concern of the sector, the insurance sector. I will be very strict in keeping time. I will allow you to introduce yourselves. In the interest of time, I'll start in this direction, and then you'll return so that first, the last one will be whoever started. So Mr. Carlos Holmes Trujillo, you have the floor. Is this mic okay, or do I use that one? Thank you very much for the invitation, dear Jorge Humberto. Warm greetings to all my panel all the panel colleagues. The truth is, I would also like to live in the country of wonders painted to us by the Minister of Finance, but the reality is different. It's very hard, and it has to be changed. What do I want to do as president of Colombia? First and foremost, I want to act with the purpose of creating the conditions for Colombia's economy to grow and grow quickly. I even established as a desirable objective that our economy grow at least 7% sustainably. And what for? To have good social policy in order to eradicate poverty, to build equity, and to generate jobs. How will I do this? First and foremost, to reaching agreements with the Colombian industrial sector. And where, in a scenario of growth, the Council for Business Recovery and Quick Economic Growth, that will be a scenario that I will convene on August 8, 2018, very early, so that from this agreement process will result the sectors and products where we will be competitive, have a market, and have great capacity for generating jobs. After that will come a very detailed follow-up procedure. And follow-up of what? Following up compliance of the commitments acquired in this scenario of the crecer, or the grow. And I will personally be leading this as president of Colombia. I am not going to delegate this on any minister, because the president's leadership is fundamental, which has nothing to do with the negative caudillismos that were referred here mistakenly. Secondly, we immediately need to create the program. Let's do it fast and well. And what does this program imply? It consists of putting an end to all the unnecessary paperwork and proceeding that overwhelms Colombia's productive apparatus, that hinders it from growing and becomes a barrier to its development, and obviously affects the true possibility of this country's growth, in addition to it becoming permanent tolls that feed corruption. Thirdly, we need to reduce taxes. Of course, we have to reduce taxes, but not only reduce them, but also establish a new tax structure that is flat with low rates, that are easy from a collection standpoint, and becomes, because of these characteristics, a true antidote against evasion. On the other hand, in a purpose of growing quickly, we need to put in motion a policy of diplomacy for growth in a globalized world where the borders between what's national and international has disappeared, given that all national issues are international issues, and international issues in turn are large national issues. The entire Colombia state needs to put itself at the objective of growing quickly. But to attain this, we need trust. The trust that existed in the country and has disappeared. What must we do to recover trust? Initially, to guarantee physical security. And here, what I want to do is to, again, reinstate all the elements and principles of democratic security with the adjustments that are necessary. Secondly, we need to put an end to all the causes of insecurity resulting from the agreement Timochenko-Santos. The first thing is to remove this agreement from the Constitution, because it's a sort of judicial insecurity. Secondly, we need to stop having drug trafficking as an associated crime to political crimes, because this is a very poor message to Colombians and to the international community. Thirdly, we need to reform, transform, whatever, any point on the agreement that could put at risk private property, because private property has to be guaranteed, defended, respected, and preserved. On the other hand, we need to substantially change this GEP, Special Jurisdiction for Peace. I'm sorry, but this GEP, it steps over all the principles that have been, that existed for so many years to guarantee juridical stability to Colombians, and which can become a political court to take revenge. Also, we need to guarantee the independence of powers, which is destroyed with this commission, the parliamentary commission that was created between government and FARC, so that through it has to pass everything that will subsequently become a law of Colombia or a decree signed by the executive power. These are the changes that must be made. And I want to answer to the Minister of Finance when he mentioned me. Of course, Colombia is different. Of course, Colombia is different. It's got no constitution given the agreement signed with FARC, and we must guarantee certainty to the Colombian constitution. What other thing allows us to say that Colombia is different today? That a drug trafficker member of FARC will have impunity, and we cannot allow that, and that has to change. Because the Colombia referred to by the Minister of Finance is different, because private property is at risk and danger, and private property has to be guaranteed, defended, and preserved. The Colombia that I want is entirely different from the Colombia painted here by the Minister of Finance. Thank you very much. Juan Manuel Galán. Good morning. Greetings to Jorge Enrique Botero. I want to thank him for his invitation, and good morning to all attendees. The motto of this conference is Colombia, a safer country. I am sure that if we want to make Colombia a truly sure or secure country, we have to put an end to the ballast that our country drags around, which is called favoring or favoritism, and corruption is the word that's in vogue. But while we have a society where those that are more favored and less favored believe that to have an opportunity, one needs of a recommendation or of influence by another, or financing a politician's campaign or a president's campaign, so that in turn one receives a tax exemption, that will never be a country that is where there's security or advanced and have an advanced, equitable, progressive society. What I want to build for Colombia is a country of opportunities, a country where we have three fundamental pillars: a comprehensive security, not limited to the public forces, armed forces, and their territorial presence, which is vital and essential, but a security that allows the state to reach the local and regional levels, that we have social policies, public assets in the regions to dominate what we have been unable to dominate throughout our history. We can still integrate the state, the nation, and the territory. We have a very large territory, but we have a very small state that is unable to reach it with the minimum services of justice, with the rule of law, with social policy. We need to build an economic policy based on inclusive growth, a growth that not only benefits certain sectors, but also benefits all sectors. We need to attain access, and for this I'm proposing certain reforms to the political and the economic models. In the economic model, we have two paths. The path we have followed for a long time, which is the path of the situations of putting out the momentary fires and define whether in Colombia there is growth or not. So we need to beg to God every single day for the exchange rate to be favorable, for the commodities prices, oil, mining, flowers, coffee, be maintained, to see if in this country we can grow at more than 5% and thus reduce the inequality rates. We need to be the owners of the fundamentals of our economy and its growth. We cannot be like prisoners of a volatile, fragile growth that depends highly on external shocks. The only way for this is to devise a strategy of productivity and innovation, to invest in innovation and productivity, which will allow us to have an exporting offer of high added value, insert ourselves in the value chains internationally. That is absolutely vital. If we want also for our middle class, which is a great conquest that our country has had in recent years, not to lose those gains it has made in recent years. 40% of the Colombian middle class is at risk of falling back into informality. And informality is a very big challenge to the Colombian economy. 99% of companies in Colombia are SMEs. 50% are in informality. They don't have access to loans or technical assistance. But in addition, least of all can it have access to a pension. If something embodies inequality and injustice in our country, it is the pension system and the possibility of accessing a pension, especially in rural areas. In rural areas, a peasant woman has zero likelihood of accessing a pension. And as our population grows older, well, this population, this elderly population, has less capacity and less likelihoods of accessing a pension. We need to establish in our economy free competition. Our economy is full of dominant positions and monopolies. If something was evidenced with this strike by the pilots of one company in Colombia, is the monopolistic status or market that exists in our economy. And if we don't guarantee for the Colombian state not to choose or pointing by finger who's leader, who's dominant, who's not, then we will not be able to create entrepreneurship, innovation, and to have this have a positive effect on consumers who expect good rates, good services, and also a innovative business fabric. Favoring not only affects the political sector, it's not just the positions, the jobs. Favoring is also represented in Colombia's fiscal policies. 70 billion Colombian pesos in tax exceptions, 30 the companies and 40 individuals. Many of these exemptions are inefficient and can be are attributed based on the power of companies of investing in political lobby to guarantee the protection of their tax exemption. That is favoring, and that generates, or it goes against free competition and the possibility of other companies of joining the game. This fiscal reform needs to take place in Colombia. Senator Duque has said it by simplifying the tax regime, coherently unifying the local, the regional, and the national. A single rate between 25 and 35% progressive for companies, reducing the burdens and compensating this reduction by reviewing tax exemptions, but also reviewing public expense. In Colombia, we have of the highest Ginies in all the sectors. In income, 0.53, I'm almost done. 0.53 before you tell me. This inequality index also developed countries in the world have, England, Germany. After these countries invest their resources, their subsidies, in Colombia we spend in subsidies 74 billion and the Ginies remain the same. That forces us to reform public expenses and social investment plans. Rafael Nieto Loaiza, pre-candidate for Centro Democrático. Mr. Jorge Humberto, people of Fasecolda, thank you for being here, accompanying us in this discussion. Several things. I guess the systematic complaint one finds when one visits the country is that we have lost our direction, our compass, and hope. That people need to recover the idea that Colombia is once again along the correct path and that we'll have a hope of a fairer, more just, more prosperous society. For this, we need to work on several things. First, we need to give democracy and the republic's institutions, once again, the value they have. Never again should it happen in our country what occurred with the plebiscite, that a majority wins, and after that, they're tricked, and the popular decision is overlooked and ignored, even if it was for a very small margin. Second, we need to modify the agreements with FARC. It's not my idea that we need to put dynamite on this agreement. I agree with the fact that these criminals stop committing criminal acts, but the truth is that a set of benefits, prerogatives were established there for the criminals that those of us, common citizens, do not have. The structure created to favor criminals is unacceptable in the rule of law. So we need to make a set of modifications to that agreement. First is the agreement has to be removed from the Constitution to restore the Constitution of 91. Second, we need to put an end to the co-administration with FARC, which today have to give their approval to any decree or any law or anything that modifies the agreements. Thirdly, to change all those aspects that end up rewarding criminals over common citizens who do good. Also, to dismount the perverse agreements favoring or accepting drug trafficking included in said agreement. And lastly, we need to rescue private property and eliminate all those threats on private property included in said agreement. The second element, and this about defending democracy and institutionality, this country needs a very deep justice reform from head to toe that guarantees that the administration of justice, which is fundamental and a public service, yields guarantees of equality in justice and celerity for all citizens. A second big element, we need to recover security. 188,000 hectares of cocaine in 2016, 90 tons of production, 3 times more than what we had during President Uribe's administration, is the result of the agreement with FARC. This needs to be attacked deeply, the criminal FARC and the criminal bands associated to this drug trafficking, and we need to combat micro-trafficking, which is nothing else than a commercial policy to become our young and children drug addicts by putting in the local market the surpluses that are no longer exported, and drug addiction. These are the issues with greater demand in all the municipalities we visited in Colombia. All communities complain: drug trafficking, micro-trafficking, and drug addiction. And other things that are starting to have a great impact on especially rural areas, cattle theft, and their budgets have been reduced, and operating capacity of their institutions have been changed, and today, in the armed forces and police, today those who are about to retire will be taken under a special jurisdiction or judged under a special jurisdiction that will punish them, while the drug traffickers of NARC will be in the impunity. This is cannot be a challenge that cannot be postponed. Today, the problem of corruption has expanded of the executive and the legislative also to the judicial branch, and we have 3 former presidents of the courts being tried, and 2 others that are being named as such, as corrupt. Just to give you an idea, the Ministry of Agriculture spent more than 3 billion pesos between 2015 and 16 in direct contracting. 82% of public contracting in Colombia in the regions and municipalities is direct contracting, 70% at the central level. Either we fight this all the way to the bottom, or we'll have no money that will be sufficient. Fourth, we need to protect family. We need to protect life. Here, 25% of homes in Colombia is by women heads of family. We need to bet on a network of social protection to fight against abuse against women and children and against childhood pregnancy. Also, we need to build a country where we are all owners through an inclusive process. Our bet is clearly in free market, protection of private property, and incentivizing private businesses. The public sector doesn't create anything. The public sector should return the taxes we pay it in goods and services with coverage and quality, and it doesn't do it because there's patronage, it's corrupt. Santos hired 19,000 people more in these years of administration and added 78,000 additional service provision contracts. And between 2012 and 2014, he spent 2.3 billion Colombian pesos in advertising and propaganda. I won't know the exact figure until his administration is over, but we would have saved ourselves an entire tax reform. Having said this, what must we do? Stability in the rules of the game, juridical certainty, physical security, incentives that remain over time, and a tax reform that has to begin with reducing the VAT, which took away capacity of savings and spending to the poorest class in our country, and also by reducing the income tax rate. But this cannot happen if we don't do three things: fight against corruption, revise public expenses to have an austere effective state, and in addition, necessarily, we need to increase the taxpayer basis. Otherwise, it would be impossible to have an exercise of tax reduction. If we don't do it this way, things won't work. And all of this for what? To bet at the end to reducing poverty, which today affects 28% of Colombian citizens. Efficient public expense solely to focus on those who are the poorest. Thank you very much. Juan Carlos Pinzón, thank you very much. Daniel, to you and all the speakers who are thinking about it, about Colombian democracy. Mr. Botero, you know how much I appreciate you. You were my boss for some days, and it's a pleasure to be back here again in these spaces. We know Fasecolda, we know many of the people who have worked in the sector for many years, and I know you're people who work for this country. The insurance sector had to make decisions that today seem easy, but let's go back 10, 15, 20 years ago to see what it used to be to do insurance businesses in a country where practically nobody wanted to reinsure. So fortunately, here we are in times of innovation and in times of thinking about the future. I must say that I'm in this for the first time in my life. I had never done politics. I'm not a senator. I've never been a congressman, mayor, candidate. I haven't changed parties 5 times, none of that. I made the decision of participating here in this out of love for my country. That's why we started this movement of collecting signatures called Colombia above all, ante todo Colombia. Why? Because our nation is first, because we could not continue in something where everybody pulls to their own side, everybody pulls whichever way is convenient to them. One party goes in one direction, another party in another, but nobody is thinking about what they should, the country, that the country comes first. I'm here because I saw my soldiers, my policemen died. I saw them lose their legs. And they did this because the country had to be better, because we had to make Colombia a better country. Not this that's happening, that after many years of progress, we have entered into a stage of decline, of stagnancy, if you want. That's why I feel the duty of being here, of participating, of telling you Colombians that we surely feel interpreted. If you want the country to change, I also want it to change. This country needs change, a generational change, a change in political traditions, a change in class. I'm pleased of the family I come from. The country needs different people in this. But it is change with experience. But it is not just talking to please somebody. It's not talking about things that people want to say but have never done. The country, we've done the country well, 15 years. We've been there participating, getting things done economically in terms of security and international relations. Under this perspective, there's three concerns that just as I am an optimist and convinced that Colombia is a wonderful city that can go far, and this micro trafficking and drug trafficking that happened in Colombia, we were able to reduce to the lowest level the production of cocaine, leaves and cocaine in Colombia. They didn't pay attention to us, and look at what's happening in drug trafficking taking over again. The peace process elevated the feeling of impunity because of the idea that the peace implied absorbing these people into society and leaving them with equal benefits, not that they had more benefits than the rest of Colombian citizens. The second, economic stagnancy. I'm worried about this. The strategic sectors, stagnancy here, we need to correct this. And thirdly, what several have said here already, loss of trust in the institutions and the weakening of institutionality in Colombia at all levels. Because then we will have anarchy, everybody pulling in their own direction, and the country is escaping our hands. And who's profiting of all this? The sectors that want to take a leap, that only yell, only scream, complain about everything, and want to take Colombia into a void, want Colombia to jump into a void. This will lead to our country's destruction. That's why we're here. We have an agenda, or we have a vision of a Colombia that's a power in Latin America. A Colombia important in terms of technology in Latin America by 2030. A Colombia that's a green power by its own nature, and that can move into the future with new sources of energy at that time. But meanwhile, the next administration needs to put Colombia into order in all its aspects: health, against corruption, justice, security, all the aspects of national life. The country needs leadership, clear signals, authority. And that's what we're willing to do, to be at the head of all the issues, to lead them, to work them out. And it is at that time, in addition to order, we need to build an agenda of opportunities. And here we have 6 pillars. There's goals and programs behind each of these. There's experience as to how to do this, national and internationally. These are security without impunity. Colombia, a paradise for investments and the generation of jobs, and this implies fiscal measures, motivation and promotion of investment that we will explain in the next question, perhaps. Humanizing health, a dignified health service. Here we have a very big issue and a very big financial issue. For education for jobs and technology with values. 5, fighting corruption without screaming, without calling everybody corrupt, that putting criminals in jail. I know how to break the backbone of criminal organization. Do I know about that? And we are going to do it with all clarity with the criminal organizations of corruption. But beware, everything that has been uncovered, it's the U.S. who helped us find out about this. Everything that we know is thanks to them. I was there working with them, with their agencies. I am the person who can maintain this work, continue it with such clarity. And 6, to elevate the role of women. Elevate women's role in productivity and economic development and social development. Rafael Nieto explained very well. I like that, Rafa. All this about women's heads of household require of a national effort in education and opportunity. You gave others extra seconds. I'll stop here, but you owe me that time. No, Daniel, and thank you very much for the opportunity. And my counter question goes to you. In advance, I apologize to you. I'm going to steal some minutes from your answers by instructions from the big boss here, because the people who are here have to go and check out from the hotel. I wanted to understand the ambassador, always an ambassador. In your presentation, how do you believe should be organized or reformed the peace agreement signed by President Santos? I thought you were going to ask me about economics in the next round. No, if you want, don't answer me. And no, I'm going to try to do both things. Regarding the agreement, to enter a negotiation was a decision by all the administrations. I participated. I was Vice Minister of Defense with President Uribe when we had these big coups against the criminal groups. I was responsible for that. I haven't told much about this, but the target was always to hit on them, to beat on them, to do a negotiation, to attack and beat them, to reach a peace process. What I didn't like was the way how it was negotiated. And I said it within government, and I said it publicly. I disagree with the way it is being done. I disagreed with weakening military actions. That's why I was said I was like the stone in their shoe, like I was the obstacle to this. So I was removed. I was an issue. You were a journalist, and you would interview me at the time, Daniel, and it was all over. It was well known. The truth is that we wanted a negotiation, but from strength, from firmness. But with what there is now, listen, there's decisions that you cannot go back on. You cannot reverse history. I do not want to repeat the scenarios that I did have to experience. There's people who speak strongly, but you have to look at what's you have in your pants to make the decisions you need to make. And it happens that I don't believe that on that idea of going back, but you do have to demand and be ready to use the legitimate force of the state with force when necessary. So I do not accept this mocking that has been happening. I know the FARC have people in Venezuela. I know it for obvious reason. That FARC have properties in Venezuela. I know it. This is hidden weapons and monies. When I told the government, yes, they have them. Every day the army finds them. It's not me saying it. It's the journalist from the Ministry of Defense, and I'm the liar. No, what I'm not going to allow is for them to make fun of us. And there's two things I have to modify there if we want a country to advance. The special justice, GEP, I did not agree with there being two courts or a single court. Rafa agreed with me there. There should have been two courts. I was the one who demanded that state agents have benefits in this peace agreement. It was me, but not with a single court, because a single court, what is causing is all this confusion and ideological postures that create uncertainty in the country. And the other thing is the co-government in certain regions of Colombia. With the PEX and CCB, FARC have been given a power they never had and never dreamt of, which was to co-govern with the country. If we want the country to advance in economic terms, and obviously I would have wanted to dwell deeper in this because that's my field. That's what I've been all my life, an economist, an expert on economic matters. In the trade associations, in the private sector. I was economist for Colombia and at the World Bank. That's what we worked on. We would also like to talk about that because the country needs to talk more about the future and less of the past. But what we need is a president with the leadership to put an end to things and have a strong posture. Juan Carlos Pinzón. Rafael, from your comments, many proposals can be launched simultaneously, but you need to prioritize sentence. Give me your list of priorities from that program that you mentioned. Well, you're asking for the government not to do what it has to do, and it has to do in the different fields. You have to work on defending democracy and institutionality. You have to work on fighting against corruption. You have to work on security. These are three fields you cannot abandon, and you also need to work on protecting life and the family. And another issue is, another subject is the economy, and it needs to have a different handling than it's been having now. Growing at 1.2%, it's an economy that's destined ultimately for an increase in poverty and unemployment. If we don't grow at a minimum 4%, neither reduce poverty or unemployment. The question is, can we do it? I believe we can, but we need to make deep decisions. so that we can enter into these dynamics with stability in the rules of the game, physical security, reduction in tax rates, simplifying the regulations. We need to reduce the normative cost, the regulatory cost in the country, which is extremely high, and fight against proceedings. And you need to fight simultaneously in seeking an austere, efficient state, and on the other hand, not overspending, and also you need to fight corruption. Let me reflect about the sector, which is, I think, deserves to be put on the table. In 15 years, almost 20% of the sector, adding the 13% car plus 8% SOAT, will be doubtful. When vehicles work alone, we'll be talking about a different issue here. Who's going to be insured is the producer and not the user. How to adjust this sector in the future, we need to start thinking about it as of now. There's one first reflection. And secondly, meanwhile, why don't we go along the line, a proposal by Samuel Hoyos from my team at Centro Democrático in Congress of building an insurance of simple clashes or shocks. The average time of arrival of a policeman to a crash is like an hour, hour and a half, with 2 cops and a very big traffic jam. So I think we need to talk about this. A third problem I want to talk about this sector. Why don't we think about microinsurance for professional risks for the rural sector instead of people having to be affiliated to an ARP? What is being generated by putting in the same level insurance in the cities and the rural areas is informality. So why don't we think at least as to professional risk, we have microinsurance in that sector. An additional proposal to think about in health. I think it's going to cause polemic, but it's worthwhile thinking. Your problem is if you have a problem with, if you're affiliated to an EPS, you can only go to an IPS that participates with your EPS. But why don't you just let the citizens choose the IPS they want to go to? You can create competition that way and solve a very substantive problem. Juan Manuel, independence of internal shocks in a globalized economy, how to maintain open markets and be protected from external shocks. Well, in my first remarks, I concentrated on the economic matters, and I did not talk about the political model. But to answer your question, the bet on productivity is absolutely essential. This policy must be linked to a policy where the citizens, politicians, public servants don't think the thing is about favoring and doing personal transactions, looking for who's going to bring me whose influence, but that we transform the mentality of a favor to the mentality of a right, that any Colombian citizen, regardless of their condition, have certainty that when they approach seeking a service or trying to have an opportunity, it's guaranteeing a right and not of a favor being done to them. But I want to talk a bit about the political model. In Colombia, we have something that's perverse and inefficient in the operation of our national state with respect to the territorial entities. I have to say that the dynamic of decentralization in Colombia was interrupted. The transfer of resources, of functions, the transfer of institutional power to the regions is extremely weak. But look at this perverse situation we have. From Monday to Friday, mayors and governors, instead of being in the regions, their territories, with their communities, are beggars in Bogota. They go to the ministries, the office of congressmen, to see who can give them some resources or make feasible a project in order that they can comply with the regions. And Monday through Friday, from the central government, many public servants are sent to their territories, and they can complement their salaries with the per diems they are given for these travels. This has to change. Local governors have to be full-time governors from Monday to Friday on weekends in their territories, working with their communities, planning their future, defining where they're going to invest their budgets, being the true owners of their destiny. And at national level officers, many of them technicians, have to stay in their jobs in the national government. I'm not saying they're juppies or their daddy's son or daughter. No, they have had an opportunity to receive an education that's very good and positive for the administration. But local administrators, governors, mayors, they have to have the opportunity of working there, staying with their communities, and being the owners of their destiny. This is a transformation that I am going to do from my administration. Carlos Holmes, you have launched perhaps the most attractive economic proposal, the 17% growth, which has increase. Well, the central bank board believes the Colombian economic growth is between 2.5 and 3%. How to attain that growth without an economy that's planned centrally and in a free market where private property is respected? Well, like I said, it with a policy of consultation or agreement with the private sector, setting into motion this program I call Let's Grow Quickly, and doing it well, reducing taxes, having a low flat structure that enables easy collection and becomes an antidote against evasion, of course fighting against corruption, and setting into motion in this globalization environment a diplomacy for growth. These are basically the elements. I want to refer very briefly Jorge Humberto, the proposal of unemployment insurance. I think it's worthwhile to analyze it in a more comprehensive way in light of the three elements mentioned in your document, and in any case voluntary, that it doesn't imply at all an additional burden, neither for the company nor for the state. As to insurance, what we have here with SOAT is lack of authority. What do we need? Policy first that doesn't exist in terms of highway security, and in the second place, very strict regulations related to all the aspects that have presently substantially increased the accidentality. And that's called authority, including, of course, the problem of evasion, which reaches 39–40%. On the other hand, I believe in a culture of insurance. I think that promoting it is fundamental, considering what should be the comprehensive vision of security, because there cannot be security in a society if at the same time there isn't a culture of insurance. Let me tell you that on this matter, I coincide with what you are stating or proposing, or some of you, or one of you. It is much better to have an insurance and not need it than needing an insurance and not having it. Good luck in your activities. Well, thank you to all the candidates. A round of applause for all our candidates, and thank you very much.